Gen 1 is regarded as the most popular generation of Pokemon of all time, especially since it's the OG generation. Can a ton of fan favorites and classics be strong enough to take on all of the new generations in 200 waves of PokeRogue? While there are tons of iconic Pokemon in Generation 1, the obvious big three are the starters, and because we can't use legendaries, we can't select anything like Mewtwo or Mew. That being said, I just went with Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle to lead off this run. This run started off pretty well as we ran into a Pichu on wave 9, which we wouldn't be able to use immediately because it's not part of Generation 1, but we can once it evolves. Soon after this, on wave 10, we ran into a boss Nidoran, which we caught and decided to add to the team, giving us a Nidoqueen in the future. Early on, we had a couple of our Pokemon evolving, being Bulbasaur evolving into Ivysaur, and then we also had Charmander evolving into Charmeleon. Wave 25 was against our rival Ivy, and this was a great showcase of just how broken egg moves can really be. My Ivysaur has access to 4 egg moves being Malignant Chain, Sappy Seed, Matcha Gotcha, and Earth Power. The combination of these 4 moves gives me enough coverage to one-shot every single one of Ivy's Pokemon early on. After we defeated Ivy, it was time for our Squirtle to evolve into Wartortle before moving on to our first gym of the run. The first gym leader we faced in this run was none other than Erica and her team of grass types. This was going to be super easy for us as the combination of Charmeleon with his fire type moves and then Bulbasaur with the poison type moves, this really wasn't going to be too much of a challenge. We took down the Tangela after just a couple of turns, and then our Nidoran female ended up evolving into Nidorina. This was good because now we're going to have access to the Moonstone and drops in order to evolve her into Nidoqueen. After this, Erica sent out her Oddish, which obviously stood no chance despite me being paralyzed, as a single Aeroblast was all that it took to take down Oddish to 1% HP. After getting hit with the Acid, I decided to go for a Fire Fang, and I leveled up in the process. I ended up teaching Pichu Nasty Plot, which was going to be useful in the future because it raises my special attack by 2 stages. Bellsprout came out, but has 0 defense, so 1 Fire Fang was all it took to take down Erica. As many of you may know, after you defeat the first gym leader in PokeRogue, we get a huge power boost to our team with a lot of our starters evolving, especially if they're just regular starter Pokemon. Our Ivysaur evolved into Venusaur, which gave me a massive power boost, and then our Charmeleon evolved into Charizard, and of course I was rocking the original shiny variant, because who doesn't love a black Charizard? On wave 51, we encountered none other than Vaporeon, one of my favorite evolutions. I honestly had a goal for this run being to catch all the evolutions, but that actually didn't end up happening, but I'm glad that we did get a Vaporeon with access to the move Bouncy Bubble, which it normally does not have. And with our Wartortle finally evolved into Blastoise, we finally had all of our OG starters fully evolved. Soon later, we ended up getting the event to where we could train one of our Pokemon to get a new ability, increased IVs, or a different nature. I decided to train against our Blastoise, giving it access to its hidden ability, Rain Dish. I don't know if that's its actual hidden ability in Pokemon, but it is in PokeRogue, which could be useful, but it probably won't be too helpful in the long run. The very next wave, we had to fight our rival Ivy for the 4th time. She led out with her Decidueye as I led with my Venusaur, and she actually ended up predicting my poison type move going into Durant, completely nullifying the move with its steel typing. I decided to go with a Flamethrower, and to my surprise, she actually didn't switch out Durant, meaning that I got the Oko and the passive Battle Bond ability to proc. After this, she sent in her Toucannon, which I just went with Flamethrower, taking it down to about 1% HP, before one more finally knocks out the bird. Nidoqueen comes out, which is ironic because we have one of those on our team, and I hit it with an Earth Power, which one-shots it with ease. This rival fight is actually a great example of how broken the passive abilities can actually be. With Charizard having Battle Bond, just the 3 boost that it gives was strong enough to take down Ivy by itself. Our second gym fight was going to be against none other than Crasher Wake and his team of water types. He led out with his Gyarados, which did get an intimidation proc on me, but it doesn't matter all that much as Venusaur isn't a physical attacker, at least not with the moveset that I have for it. Empoleon switches in and gets hit with a Matcha Gotcha, which actually hit him for a critical hit, meaning that Empoleon switched out the very next turn and did no damage. Gyarados came back in and I hit it with a Matcha Gotcha, doing barely any damage, but I also hit a Malignant Chain which poisoned it, taking it out in the same turn. Quagsire came in and due to its quad weakness to grass stood absolutely no chance as Floatzel came in and also got one shot. This left only Empoleon left, and after one use of Matcha Gotcha, we took down the King Penguin and got our win against Crasher Wake. I'd bet that most of you probably forgot that we actually caught a Pichu earlier on because we haven't been able to use it a single time. But that all changed when it evolved into Pikachu, giving us access to one of the most popular Pokemon of all time. Speaking of popular Pokemon, we caught a Haunter on Wave 71, giving us access to Gengar. Soon after this, we found the Thunderstone, evolving our Pikachu into Raichu just a few moments after it finally evolved out of Pichu. For those of you wondering what happened to Nidoran, I just switched her out for Haunter, so technically it's not a death, but she's also not on the team anymore. On Wave 81, we were met with a tough decision, having to choose between getting a Gengar or the Mega Bracelet. I pretended this was a tough decision, as I immediately chose the Mega Bracelet, as we could have 4 Mega Pokemon on our team right now. This was the right decision to make, as we immediately got another linking cord, evolving our Haunter into the infamous Gengar. Our team was now full of star power, having majority of the most popular Pokemon from Generation 1 on our lineup. But it was time to see how good they were actually in battle, as we were going against our rival Ivy on Wave 95 for the 5th time. Decidueye led out and actually terrestrialized into the Grass type, which I didn't expect. I went for an Aeroblast, but actually ended up hitting Kingdra, but it does enough damage to take Kingdra out in just 2 hits, and I was able to outspeed because Charizard was way higher level than Kingdra. After this, she sent out her Nidoqueen, which obviously was going to go down and one-shot the Earth Power, but I decided to actually pass the baton into a Vaporeon. Vaporeon has seen the battlefield for the first time now, and I wanted to see what it could do. Unfortunately for us, this just made Ivy switch into her Decidueye again, so I actually had to switch back into Charizard. I predicted the switch into Nidoqueen though, and a single Earthquake was all it took to take down Nidoqueen. With another Battle Bond boost and the addition of our baton, we were able to switch out freely, which means the first Battle Bond boost actually stacked on top of this one. I know that was a lot of words in one moment, but just know that our Charizard is absolutely busted as we take down the rest of Ivy's team using only Flamethrower. On Wave 110, tragedy was about to strike as we were going against a boss Rotom Frost, which was super effective against majority of our team. This was a huge problem, as after going for a Sappy Seed, I did manage to get a Leech Seed off, but I knew I was going to have to sacrifice a Pokemon at some point. Blizzard did a lot of damage to Blastoise despite not being very effective, and I actually decided to switch into Raichu at this moment, which took a discharge for over half its health. I do end up going for Zippy Zap as it always goes first, getting a little bit of chip on the Rotom. Unfortunately, Rotom does land a Blizzard, taking down our Raichu, granting us our first death of the run. Charizard is able to come back in though and land a single Flamethrower, which was more than enough to knock out the Rotom in just 1 turn, ending our battle. On Wave 111, we ran into a Machamp, which obviously we had to catch. I ended up throwing a couple of Rogue Balls and getting a critical catch, catching the Machamp in just a few turns, which was going to be a great addition to our team as we did not have a fighting type yet. On Wave 120, it was time for our next gym fight against none other than Watson and his team of electric types. We no longer had Raichu, but we did replace it with Machamp, meaning that we still had a full team of 6 going into this. Magnezone got hit with an Earth Power on turn 1, which actually ended up one-shotting it. I decided to send in a Machamp, which ended up taking a Thunder from Electrode, which Venusaur probably would have taken a lot better. I go for a couple of Cross Chops though, and with my No Guard ability, it was guaranteed to hit every single time. This is when Plusle came in, and I decided to send Venusaur back out, hitting a Thunder for just a little bit of damage. I decided at this point that I'm gonna just go for a Matcha Gotcha to heal back up all the damage I've taken so far, which is not enough to one-shot the Plusle, taking another Thunder. Plusle then outspeeds due to its eating of the berries, but another Matcha Gotcha was all that it took to take down the Plusle. Manectric ended up terrestrializing into an electric type and going for a Wild Charge, which did basically nothing to my Venusaur, as I go for a couple more Matcha Gotchas and an Earth Power, which takes down the electric dog with ease. Electros came back in, and I couldn't go for Earth Power due to its Levitate ability, so I decided to go for Matcha Gotcha, which actually gets the burn, meaning that I 2-shot it instead of 3. Pachirisu then comes in, and of course takes a Matcha Gotcha like an absolute tank, which makes no sense, but with 1 more Earth Power, we defeated Watson. While traveling through the power plant, we encountered an Empoleon and a Alolan Sand Slash. I don't know why they were in a power plant, but a Surf managed to take down Machamp, meaning that we lost the Pokemon. But never fear, Fearo's here, and we ended up catching a Fearo to replace the Machamp, which isn't as good, but you know what, that's another Pokemon that may come in handy for a sacrifice. It was now time to see if our team was going to be strong enough to make it through the rest of the game, as we were taking on rival Ivy on Wave 145. As many of you know, this is a very important wave, as we are going up against none other than a shiny Tier 2 Rayquaza. As I take down the Toucannon with an Aeroblast, it was time to now see the one Pokemon that we feared a lot, being that Rayquaza. I decided to go for a Dragon Pulse, and even after the Battle Bond, it didn't do very much damage, taking it down only 1 health bar. A second one did manage to take it down to its final one, and I was confident that with one more we would take out the giant dragon, which is exactly what happened. With Rayquaza down, I was now confident that I would be able to sweep the rest of Ivy's team, especially with that battle bond bonus. And this was exactly what ended up happening, as Kingdra went down to a Dragon Pulse and Nidoqueen went down to an Earth Power, as Decidueye comes out and terrestrializes but gets one shot by a single Flamethrower. This leaves Ivy with only her Durant left, which obviously goes down to a single Flamethrower, granting us a victory against our rival once again. Not only did we get the victory, we got access to either the Charizardite Y or the Blastoise-Knight, and who are you kidding? Of course, I'm going to go with the Charizardite Y, because who does not love this shiny Mega Charizard? I was also gambling here because I didn't know if the current rule set would allow me to use Mega Pokemon, as technically they weren't in Generation 1. But according to the rules of PokeRogue's Gen 1 only, I was able to use it as the base form Pokemon is from Generation 1. It's currently wave 150 and we're fighting against our 5th gym leader Crest and his team of water types. Now this battle was a breeze, as now our team is so powered up that just these regular Pokemon like Bibarel aren't really going to cut it. Masculegion does come out and that is a bit scary, but there's not a lot of Pokemon fainted on Crest's team yet, meaning Last Respects won't do too much damage. I switch into Venusaur and go for a Machagacha, which does get Masculegion down to about 1% HP, before I go for one more, taking it out. At this point, Crest is left with only 3 more Pokemon, and none of them are very good, as he decides to send in Simipour and Terrasilize, which goes for a Bite. I don't know if Bite was the strongest move in that scenario, but it went down to single Machagacha, before Seismitoad meets the same fate, leaving only Samurott left, and of course Samurott does take one hit from Machagacha, but wastes a turn on Swords Dance, meaning that one more Machagacha is all that it took to defeat Gym Leader Crest. But of course, this is a Gen 1 challenge, and it wouldn't be Gen 1 if we didn't have to go against Giovanni. Now he led off with a Rhyperior, which obviously was very scary for my Charizard, so I switched into Venusaur and went for a Sappy Seed, which ended up hitting the Nidoqueen instead. But with the extra damage from the Leech Seed, I could just go for another one, guaranteeing a kill and healing. He then switched into his Articuno, which was a bit scary, but I decided to play the long game, switching into Charizard, which would likely force a switch on his turn. This being said, I decided to gamble and switch back into Venusaur, predicting the switch into Rhyperior, which is exactly what happened, and I got a free Sappy Seed off on Articuno, now taking its health little by little. I decided to switch back into Mega Charizard here, which actually did force a switch, which probably wasn't the greatest thing, but I really needed this Rhyperior out of this fight so I could just use my Charizard. That being said, after hitting Rhyperior with a Sappy Seed, I decided to go for another, which of course ends up hitting the Articuno, as we're now playing a game of Switcheroo. After the Sappy Seed takes it down to its exact half HP bar, Charizard comes back out, and now I was confident that I would be able to take this thing out no matter what. That being said, I decided to switch into Venusaur just to be safe, and he does switch back into Rhyperior, and one Sappy Seed was all that it took to hit Mewtwo. And this was insane. I couldn't believe that he had a Mewtwo on his team, as I was very jealous, as I wanted to use that on mine. But our emergency Fearow did have to come out and get one shot by this Mewtwo in order to get his clean switch into our Mega Charizard. That being said, I didn't know if he would switch here or not, so I decided to go for a Flamethrower, which took the Mewtwo down to 1% HP as it goes for Amnesia. However, the Sappy Seed's Leech Seed might have mattered here, as it takes it back down into the red, and a single Flamethrower was all that it took to take down the Mewtwo once and for all. At this point, I just went for an Earth Power and Rhyperior as it one-shot it, and Mega Kangaskhan comes out. Now this got really scary, as I got hit with an Aqua Tail, and with Parental Bond it hit me twice. Mega Charizard did live it though, and took down the Kangaskhan in just a couple of Flamethrowers, and I decided it's probably best if I switch out against Honchkrow, as it's notorious for having a Sucker Punch. This is exactly the move that Honchkrow used, and I don't know if that would have killed Charizard or not, but I'm very glad that I switched to Vaporeon here, as a couple of bouncy bubbles took it down to literally 1 HP, as one more took it out once and for all. This left none other than Articuno left on his team, and I decided to go for a bouncing bubble, which was a little bit risky, as an Air Slash did take me into the red. But I decided to play it safe at this point and switch into Blastoise, which immediately got frozen by a blizzard, and I tried to use Shore Up about 5 times, and I stayed frozen the entire time. I thought that you would be able to unfreeze after like 3 to 4 turns, but apparently that's not how freeze works. So I decided to switch into Gengar, which makes its debut, and go for a Shadow Ball, which took Articuno down to 1 HP, with one more doing the final blow, and we defeated Giovanni. It was now time for our last regular gym leader fight against none other than Koga's kid, Janine. I don't know if that's actual lore, but they have very similar animations, so I'm assuming that's the thing. Maybe it's like his wife or something, I don't really know. But a couple of flamethrowers takes down the Galarian Slowbro as Tentacle gets sent out, and I decide to switch it into Venusaur. I didn't really know which move to go for here, as I could go for a Machagacha, which would do neutral damage, or go for an Earth Power, which would likely do a lot of damage on the switch. Unfortunately, he ended up switching into a Flying type, which meant that my Earth Power did nothing. Vaporeon does come out and lands a Bouncy Bubble though, which takes Crobat down to about 60% HP, as I survive on just 5 HP the very next turn. I switch into Blastoise here, saving my Vaporeon's life, and go for a Freeze Dry, which actually ends up hitting the Tentacruel for super effective damage. But if I didn't just tell you that, you would probably assume it was regular damage because that did basically nothing. Yeah, our Blastoise isn't very strong for whatever reason. But Blastoise does end up getting poisoned, which isn't great, as now we're taking tick damage after every single turn. So I was forced to switch in to none other than our Mega Charizard, but with the drought, it wasn't as scary, and especially since Tentacruel was using Sludge Wave. I do take the Hydro Pump before hitting a Flamethrower, which takes down the Tentacruel, and now my Charizard ate a berry, taking it above half HP, which absolutely mattered here, as that Dire Claw would have taken me out, and thankfully we hit through Paralysis, saving our Charizard to live another day. Here, I switch into Gengar, as its Fairy typing probably wasn't going to be too much of a problem, and I just decided to go for Hypnosis, which actually ended up missing the Ariados. This Ariados was actually really strong, and if I didn't hit that Hypnosis there, Gengar was going down. But luckily for me, I did actually hit it, and the Dream Eater healed me back up to full HP, and took down the Ariados at the same time. Venomoth then terrestrialized into a pure poison type as I hit it with a Shadow Ball, taking it down to about 10% HP, as another Shadow Ball ends up hitting none other than the Galarian Weezing. This did enough damage to take down Weezing in just 2 turns, leaving only the Venomoth left, and one more Shadow Ball was all that it took to beat Janine and progress us on to none other than the Elite Four. I actually ended up catching a Venomoth on this wave previous, but I didn't have the recording for whatever reason. That being said, it was now time to fight Elite Four Lorelei and her team of Ice types. As you can see, the Venomoth I caught is still frozen and not even healed up, as I only planned on using it as fodder just in case I needed a free switch in. Mega Charizard White came in and took down the Dugong with just a single Flamethrower, as Cloyster gets sent in next. I am aware that this Cloyster might have Rock Blast, but I still took the gamble with Flamethrower and took it down in just 1 hit, securing our safety. Lapras comes in next and does hit us with a single Water type move, which did basically nothing due to the drought. 2 Flamethrowers is all it took to take down the Lapras, as Jinx comes out and goes down immediately to a single Flamethrower. Charizard is absolutely annihilating this team, and Slowbro comes out and terrestrializes into the Ice type. I ended up hitting it with a Dragon Pulse, which probably wasn't the best thing, but I did survive a hit and then took it down with a single Flamethrower right after. Avalok then went down to a Flamethrower and we took down Lorelei. I ended up replacing our useless Venomoth with a Ninetales that had the Charcoal item, which I just gave to Charizard for more damage. On wave 184, it was time to fight the next Elite Four member, Bruno. And this team was going to be another breeze, as they're all fighting types, and Charizard has the ability Aeroblast. Aeroblast is Lugia's signature move, meaning that we're just going to be doing legendary amounts of damage every single turn. I almost made a mistake and went for a Flamethrower here, but I realized that it's going to terrestrialize into a fighting type, so I just went for another Aeroblast. And at this point, there was nothing that was going to survive a single Aeroblast from Charizard, meaning that Bruno was pretty much just a waste of time. He sends in his throw, and maybe this could take an Aeroblast, but no, it couldn't, and it goes down to just 1 hit as Machamp comes out, reminding us of what we've lost on this run. This Machamp actually did take an Aeroblast, as it has 2 health bars, and hits us with a Mountain Gale, which does basically no damage because it's an Ice type move. Him on top comes back out, and 1 more Aeroblast is all that it took to take down the final Pokemon and defeat Bruno once and for all. The next member that we had to take down was none other than Agatha, and her team of Ghost types. She led off with her Miss Magius, which I ended up just going for a Flamethrower, which hit the Marowak, and despite not being very effective, it took it down to 10% HP before eating a berry. I went for another Flamethrower, which obviously took down the Marowak, before I get hit with Malignant Chain by Gengar, poisoning me in the process. A single Flamethrower did knock out the Gengar, but now I'm poisoned, which puts Charizard on a timer, making it a lot more difficult for him to stay on the field. I decided to switch into Gengar here, which took a poison very easily, only taking 20 damage from that. A single Shadow Ball was enough to take Cursula down to about 20% HP, so another one was enough to take it out. Dhelmise then comes in, and this wasn't really a good matchup for Dhelmise, but I still decided to switch out into Ninetales, which took a Spirit Shackle, almost immediately killing it. And I did go for a Fire Blast, but it just wasn't enough to take out the Dhelmise because I was just a little bit underleveled. So unfortunately our Ninetales does go down, but we only had it for about 4 waves anyways. Charizard comes back out obviously and goes for a Flamethrower, knocking out the Mismagius in just 1 hit, before another one takes down the Arbok. At this point, I know the poison won't kill me, and I just go for one more Flamethrower and knock out the Dhelmise, securing our victory against Agatha. To fill the gap that the Ninetales left, I caught a Parasect on the very next wave, and it was very fortunate that I ran into 3 Gen 1 Pokemon between each fight. I don't know what the odds of that are. Anyways, it was time to fight none other than Lance and his team of Dragon types. Lance led off with his Kingdra, and I immediately switched into Venusaur to get the type matchup. Hydro Pump did a whopping 54 damage as I go for a Sappy Seed, which ended up hitting the Dragonite. This actually works out in my favor as the Sappy Seed's Leech Seed does more damage than the move itself does, and I was able to switch into Blastoise and set up my defense while being healed from the Leech Seed. That being said, after just a few turns, I eventually ended up getting up to +6 defense with my Blastoise, and Dragonite got taken down all the way to half HP from the Leech Seed. With my Blastoise so bulked up, it was now time to just go for Freeze Dries, which would be super effective on majority if not all of Lance's team. Alolan Executor comes out and is quad weak to Ice type moves, so Freeze Dry annihilated it. I also believe Kingdra would be quad weak to Freeze Dry since it is super effective against water types as well, but I ended up going for a Shore Up because I was scared I was going to go down on the next turn. Luckily for me, I do end up taking down the Kingdra just a couple turns later, and now Salamence comes out, which is also 4 times weak to Ice. A Draco Meteor takes me down to 93 HP as I go for a Shore Up. It goes for one more Draco Meteor, but now it's -4 special attack, and I go for a Freeze Dry. The Freeze Dry hit the Salamence hard, taking it down to about 10% HP before the Berry. It in turn hits me with another Draco Meteor, which did basically no damage, as I go for a Protect. I decided to go for Protect there just in case of a critical hit, but the critical hit actually came on the turn directly after, and I decided to go for a Shore Up as it goes for a Double Edge, which isn't enough to take me out before I get my heal off. One more Freeze Dry was all that it took to take down Salamence, which then took Lance down into his Baxcalibur. Now Baxcalibur was likely going to kill me here, so I decided to just go into Charizard as I took a Draco Meteor to the dome. I went for a Flamethrower here, but I actually ended up hitting the Aerodactyl instead. Luckily for me though, the berries that Aerodactyl had did not increase its speed, but I still actually ended up switching into Parasect. Parasect dodged an attack from Aerodactyl and then ended up hitting the Dragonite with a Spore, putting it to sleep. But unfortunately the Dragonite had a Lumberry, meaning that it did wake up. One more Spore did land though, putting it to sleep for the 2nd time, without taking any damage as Dragonite missed both of its attacks. A Dragon Pulse took Dragonite down to about 10% HP, as it did heal up due to its Citrus Berry. One more Dragon Pulse though actually hit the Aerodactyl, but due to it being terrestrialized, it was super effective and took down the Aerodactyl in just 1 turn. Baxcalibur came back out and took a lot of damage from Flamethrower while doing even more damage with Glaive Rush. Charizard was now on 36 HP, but with one more Dragon Pulse, I took down the final Dragonite, defeating Lance once and for all. Of course, we're facing none other than Champion Blue, is a wannabe a Gen 1 run without it. And he leads off with his Alakazam as I switch into none other than my Blastoise. This actually worked out perfectly because he switched into Rhyperior, so I guess this works out. Rhyperior goes for Earthquake and I go for Iron Defense, so the Earthquake doesn't do too much damage. At this point, I decided to go for 3 Iron Defenses, which took my defense all the way up to +6. At this point, I decided to go for a Shore Up to heal back up, as he goes for a Rock Polish. Rock Polish probably won't matter too much, but an Earthquake does hit me for 77 damage, as my Freeze Dry hits him for only a little bit more. At this point, I just keep going for Shore Ups and Freeze Dries to try to do some damage before he switches into his Gyarados. Now Gyarados is quad weak to Freeze Dry, especially since it's super effective against water types, so terrestrializing doesn't really matter too much as it's still super effective. At this point though, Gyarados is super beefed up and goes for a Waterfall, but it only does 35 damage because we are at +6 defense. Mega Pidgeot comes out and I go for another Freeze Dry, which does do quite a bit of damage, taking it down to its half HP bar. For some reason, Pidgeot decided to go for a Double Edge instead of Hurricane, but I actually went for Protect, which did block the Hurricane on the next turn. At this point, it was pretty easy, as I just went for another Freeze Dry, taking it down to about 1/4 HP. One more Freeze Dry would be enough to take it out, but I decided to go for a Protect just for safe measure. After I go for another Freeze Dry, Mega Pidgeot did go down and Blastoise won the 1v1. Alakazam comes back out, and at this point I wasn't sure if I'd be able to win or not, but I decided to go for a Freeze Dry anyways. Freeze Dry did basically nothing to this Alakazam though, and I knew I had to switch immediately. For whatever reason though, I decided to send out Gengar. I believe it was a misclick, and Gengar gets one shot on the switch. So unfortunately, one of the most popular Pokemon of all time goes down to a silly mistake by me, as I send out Vaporeon and going for a Bouncy Bubble, which was healing me just enough to actually take down this Alakazam. For some reason, Alakazam went for Aura Sphere there, which did nothing, which allowed me to get even more health from the Bouncy Bubble as I didn't take too much damage. Now, I was going for Acid Armors against Machamp as it only had physical moves, and of course, I got to +4 before going for a Bouncy Bubble, healing me up just a little bit. At this point, the only way that Vaporeon was going to go down is if Cross Chop actually ended up getting me with a critical hit, but that didn't happen as I just kept going for Bouncy Bubbles before eventually I did take down the Machamp. This left him with only 2 more Pokemon, and one of them being Ho-Oh. I don't know about y'all, but I'm pretty sure Ho-Oh is not a Generation 1 Pokemon, but I guess in a way it was because it did appear in the first episode of the anime. After a couple of Bouncy Bubbles, I did take Ho-Oh down to about 10% HP, as one more was all it took to get it back to half HP because it healed up so much. It then used Revival Blessing, reviving its Alakazam and putting him back into the battle, but a single Bouncy Bubble was all it took due to its critical hit. Vaporeon was still full HP as Bouncy Bubble heals me after every single turn, and due to me being +6 from all of the Acid Armors, Ho-Oh could do basically no damage as its only non-very effective move didn't do very much. This left only Rhyperior left, and due to it being quad weak to Bouncy Bubble, Vaporeon effectively took out 4 of Blue's 6 Pokemon. It was now time for our final trainer fight against none other than our rival Ivy. And on the first turn of this battle, I wasn't sure if she was going to Terrasilize or switch, so I decided to just go into Venusaur as either way I would have been in a better position. After sending out Venusaur, Ivy ended up switching into her Kingdra, so it worked out in my favor. I ended up going for a Sappy Seed here, which didn't hit the Kingdra but instead hit the Durant, which isn't too bad as the Leech Seed damage is still pretty good. This allowed me to switch back into Mega Charizard, and after taking a Behemoth Blast, I ended up healing up just a little bit back from the Sappy Seed. I decided to start playing the Switcheroo game with her, and now we're switching between Venusaur and Charizard as she switches between Durant and Kingdra. I'm going to take another Behemoth Bash on this turn, most likely, but instead I actually ended up taking a U-turn, giving her a little bit of an edge switching into Kingdra on the same turn. Hydro Pump does basically nothing to Venusaur though, and now we're back to playing the same old game that we've been doing this entire time, but this time Durant's down to just a red, so with one more Sappy Seed, I was actually able to avoid an attack and take it out. This gave me just a little bit of an advantage until Mega Rayquaza came out, and I wasn't too sure what to do here, and I actually went for a Sappy Seed, which ended up hitting the Rayquaza as I dodged its attack. And I knew that I wasn't getting that lucky again, so I ended up switching into Blastoise, which took a V-Create. And luckily for me, it actually went for this move, which drops both of its defenses, and that was really good for me, as now I'm able to just set up with Blastoise. It does go for a Core Enforcer, which does more than half my HP, but with the leftovers plus the Sappy Seed, I was actually healing up just enough to where I can completely stall out this Rayquaza just by spamming Shore Ups. So this is exactly what I did. And eventually, this Rayquaza did get ticked down to low enough health to where Ivy had to make a tough decision. She could either keep it in or switch it out because this Rayquaza was going to die if she didn't do anything about it. So after one more turn of V-Creates, this Rayquaza was basically just useless on the battlefield, and Ivy eventually did realize that. As I go for a Freeze Dry, I end up hitting the Kingdra instead of the Rayquaza, which does do just enough damage for me to go for another one as I take a Draco Meteor from the Kingdra. Kingdra does go down though, and now Ivy has to make another tough decision, sending in Decidueye. This works for me though, as I'm able to just send in either Venusaur or Charizard, but I decided going for Venusaur and then going for a Sappy Seed was probably the best move as it's going to hit the Rayquaza. But that's not what happened, as Nidoqueen actually comes out. But I go for another Sappy Seed, and then Toucannon gets subbed in instead. So now I'm just hitting Leech Seeds on all the Pokemon except for the one that I won. Toucannon goes for a Beak Blast, which does hit Vaporeon for a ton of damage, but I go for an Aurora Beam, which does one-shot the 2 cannon, giving us a victory against that bird. Decidueye comes out, and I know it's going to go for a Leaf Blade, so I just go for Venusaur, and I take the Leaf Storm very well. Rayquaza does get switched in finally on this turn, and I do hit it with a Sappy Seed, setting up my perfect way to take it out. Of course, I didn't know if anyone would be able to survive, so I sent out Parasect, which absolutely did not take a V-Create because it's quad effective, and Parasect does go down, but it did serve its purpose of just being fodder. This allowed me to send in Blastoise and go for a Shore Up, but instead, she switched into Decidueye, and of course we are now playing a very risky game, as if I didn't take out this Rayquaza in one hit, it probably wasn't going to be very nice. I did end up hitting the Sappy Seed on Decidueye instead of Rayquaza, as it went for a Spirit Shackle, and if Ivy didn't switch out here, I think I actually would have just lost the battle, but instead, Malignant Chain takes down the Mega Rayquaza, as Nidoqueen comes out following his death. I go for a Matcha Gotcha, which actually misses, as a Noxious Torque hits me for almost half of my HP. Decidueye does come back out, and I outspeed, going for Malignant Chain, taking down Ivy's final Pokemon, and securing our final win against our rival. And to reward us, we got access to the Venusaur, which of course I selected, and now we have a Mega Venusaur going into the final fight of the game. It was now Wave 200, and it's time to see once and for all if Gen 1 Pokemon can take down all of the waves of PokeRogue. So going against Eternatus, I decided to set up my defense, as this didn't really have a move that would be able to one-shot me, other than Eternabeam, of course. It actually didn't go for Eternabeam though, and this was very lucky for me, as if it did, I don't know if I would have been able to take down this Eternatus, and we probably would have wiped the run here. I go for a Protect to get a little bit more HP before going for another Freeze Dry, which actually did end up working not in my favor, because I went for a Shore Up on accident, and it goes for a Cosmic Power, meaning that I didn't do enough damage for Freeze Dry to knock it down to its next health bar. One more did do the job though, as its special attack rose, and at this point, it was using Eternabeams as it was going to one-shot Blastoise, or so it thought. Blastoise tanked an Eternabeam, but didn't do enough damage by just 1 HP to get Eternatus down to its Eternamax form. Luckily for me though, I outsped and then took it to Eternamax on the very next turn, leaving Blastoise still alive. On the next turn, I decided to try to go for a Shore Up, and then a Earth Power against Eternatus, but my Blastoise ended up dying to a Dynamax Cannon. And I know I said an Earth Power, but I actually went for a Dragon Pulse, which probably wasn't the move there, as it barely did any damage. Vaporeon came back out, and now it was time for the odds to shift significantly in our favor. And this is all due to the fact that my Vaporeon has the move Haze. Haze is a move that eliminates all of the stat changes of every Pokemon on the field, meaning all of the buffs that Eternatus has gotten from its berries mean absolutely nothing. So now, with the combination of Haze and just the power of Mega Charizard, we were looking really good. And to preserve our Vaporeon just in case we needed that Haze again, I decided to switch into Mega Venusaur. And at this point, Eternatus was looking down on 2 Mega Starter Pokemon, and I was very confident as the combination of our moves was doing a ton of damage, and now with Sappy Seed also there, we were doing passive damage after every single turn for the rest of the fight. That being said, another Dragon Pulse took Eternatus down to its last HP bar as I go for a Synthesis, which fully healed me because of the Sunlight from Charizard's Drought ability. One more turn was between us and a victory, and as I go for one more Dragon Pulse, it takes Eternatus down to 1 HP as Sappy Seed takes it down, securing our victory and proving that Gen 1 Pokemon are in fact strong enough to beat the entirety of PokeRogue. If you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button, as we're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and the support really does mean the world to me. And if you guys want to see another generation challenge like this, or maybe even another ROM hack, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll be responding to every single one of them. That being said, I hope y'all have a great day, night, whenever you're watching. Peace.